Welcome to the Moms I Know with Sheila Walsh-Dunton and Maria Anderson-Farner. Two moms on a mission to reclaim childhood and take you from surviving to thriving on your parenting journey.
You have got to have a what the heck attitude in the kitchen from the beloved Julia Child.
Hi, this is Maria.
And this is Sheila.
And we want to welcome you to the Moms I Know.
So guess what we are talking about today with a quote from Julia Child. We are talking about kids in the kitchen. And the reason why we use that fabulous quote is because it's really the mindset you need to bring your kids in the kitchen, to be unafraid of what goes on. Because no matter if you are a renowned chef or home cook, there will always be a mess in the kitchen. Right, Maria?
I'm just laughing because I'm thinking about my kitchen right now and what it looks like. You know, we have 7 people living in the house right now, and one of them is not quite 2, and one of them is 6. And, you know, it's just we're all in the kitchen together. We're all working together. And of course, the little ones want to be right there.
Exactly. And sometimes it gets really hard to have them right there. But I think in the long run, it's exactly what we want. It's what we want them to be unafraid. We want them to experiment. And I say that often to my kids. It's just like, we got to just try. Sometimes things are going to be, sometimes they're going to work and sometimes they're not going to work. You know, and we, one of the things I want to share is that we have, at various times, we have done sourdough starters. And right now we're on a really big sourdough kick with my 10-year-old. Who it was her idea. She started it with from the Nourishing Traditions Cookbook for Children. And it was the original Nourishing Traditions where I first started doing sourdough, but this cookbook especially for children. So it's a really easy setup where you start with a mason jar and 1 tablespoon of flour and 1 tablespoon of water, feeding twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. And then you make sure you name it. You make sure you name your sourdough starter. And you basically, it's because it's alive. And you feed it like that for, I believe, like 4 to 5 days. And then you transfer the container to another jar or a bowl. And you're covering it with like I just use a dish towel usually. But you could use a napkin and you could put a rubber band around it just to make sure. What you're trying to do is capture the yeast, right, in your home, the bacteria in your home. And you are, but you want to make sure like no critters get into it. So that's why you want a rubber band over it. And then with that sourdough starter, oh my goodness, this past month we have made sourdough pizza, baguette. We just yesterday, if you follow me on my Mom That Facebook group, we made strawberry donuts, with no sugar. So sourdough is just, I can't believe I forgot this. Waffles, sourdough waffles are just the best. So, and the reason why I love sourdough is because it is kind of the healthiest way to eat bread, bread because it is, it's fermented. And so it's better for your digestion. The ingredients, the beneficials are more bioavailable. And that's why fermented foods is what we want.
I've been following you and I've been looking at these things that you've been posting and I'm going, oh my gosh, that looks fabulous, and really getting inspired by them. And my 6-year-old grandson these days has really been wanting to cook a lot. And especially when there's that kind of cranky time or they need a shift, and all I have to do is suggest something in the kitchen and he's right there. And even the little one wants to get in. And so, I think we've talked about this in earlier podcasts, but this idea of encouraging them in the kitchen. And so I love what you're doing with the sourdough. And, great cookbook recommendation.
Yeah, so that's the Nourishing Traditions Cookbook for Children. Another cookbook recommendation was, I think, the first one that for the kids in the kitchen is called Pretend Soup. And Pretend Soup, you know who the author is there. It's by Molly Katzen, right? Who we love from Broccoli, the Broccoli Forest, I think it's called. Enchanted Broccoli Forest, right? And of Moosewood fame. And in that book, it's just for kids, but it's stuff for kids to do. So they have 2 sets of directions. One with, words and everything. And the other one with pictures, it's like pictures. And so the kids can actually follow how to do a recipe. And so what you're showing them is basically kind of this order that it does take in the kitchen to make something that's edible. But in Pretend Soup, there's a lot of fun in it too, and so a lot of games. And there's a part of the Pretend Soup that it asks for the children's quotes like it, like what they thought of when they're making it and how it tasted. And so in our own book of pretend soup that I got my two older kids now who are teenagers, I had them when we would make something write their opinion of it, so it's really funny to see that. It's kind of like a little time capsule of what they thought. And I have to say that there's two recipes in there that are popover muffins and surprise muffins. And my 15-year-old still makes those weekly between the two because it's just such an easy recipe, especially the popovers, and there's no sugar. And so that's something that I'm always a fan of.
Well, I know that, you're the nutrition expert. And so it's really nice to get these recommendations from you and just to see you being in the kitchen with your children with that attitude of just, going for it and really not being afraid to let them use the utensils and learn how to measure and make a mess. And, when things go all over the counter or on the floor or whatever, but that's part of it. And also that a lot of times recipes, yes, I teach them to follow a recipe, but also we tweak things and we add things and we learn. Sometimes, we added too much salt, and sometimes that reminds me of when I was a child, adding way too much salt to something. And when I loved cooking. I loved being in the kitchen with my mom, anything to do with the food and the preparation. But also I had a little, back then it was the Betty Crocker's cookbook for boys and girls. And I look at that now and it was a lot of white flour and sugar. But, we have access to so many more nutritious ideas now. And so we can really be encouraging our kids. And the other thing is that what I'm finding is that when they're exposed to really healthy food and they're part of the preparation for it, they're eating it all and they're loving it.
Exactly. I know, there's a school, Pacific School up in Davenport, and I think there was part of the program started by Alice Waters, who was really big, right, with the school gardens and everything. And I know the school where I think their oldest grade is either 5th or 6th grade, maybe 6th grade, and they make the lunch for the whole school. And it's all from the garden. And what a wonderful program that they're doing there. And it's just like the kids are eating vegetables and,
That's an amazing program. It's such a model for the future. And I actually went and visited Pacific School, but also I went up to Berkeley and visited the Edible Schoolyard where Alice Waters of Chez Panisse really is working to try to get healthy nutrition into the schools. And we're finding, all of the studies show that if the kids are engaged, if they're involved, they're eating it. And so when we look at trying to make a difference, it's really exciting to see that.
Yeah. And I think another piece of it is like, okay, ingredients, taking your kids to the farmer's market, growing a garden right now. Perfect. We didn't even realize this, but it's springtime, and I'm looking out in my backyard right now and I'm seeing we have egg cartons with my daughter's sprouting, so we're going to be planting vegetables and flowers in the garden. And so keeping things accessible and having your mind open to these ideas, like in following your kids. Another thing is the things you have in the kitchen that are kid friendly. And what I'm thinking of specifically is like a spiralizer. That's something that your children can do to make vegetable noodles. And if they do that, like the crank, similar to like an apple core. I remember we bought an apple core as well for the kids to do the apples with. So you buy kind of fun toys, but there's a use for them, and they're not toys, they're kitchen toys in a way, I guess. But that involves the kids. So the apple spiraler, the spiralizer, the apple core, I guess is what it's called. The other thing that I bought for my kids when they were younger was a tortilla press. Mm-hmm. Where we would make our own, we'd make our masa, kind of just our cornmeal mix, which is just really, I buy Bob's Red Mill cornmeal and water. It's all it is, and a little bit of sea salt. And you make circles and you make your own tortillas. Tortilla press was, maybe like $10 to $15, but the kids had that for years and loved it.
I'm thinking of, we start with children when they're very young, pat a cake. And, so the singing games, the playing games that we start very, very young, and then we can branch out into the kitchen and the little pretend wooden fruits and vegetables that they can be cutting, and then they get up there. You've talked about the learning tower before, having that beautiful, what would you call it, a little stand that they can get up to counter height with and be safe up there. and to be able to have access to the counter. We've been getting out the Play-Doh again. So we made homemade cooked Play-Doh. And so again, that's cooking in the kitchen, but then they're practicing with rolling pins. They're practicing with cookie cutters. They're practicing with different, shapes and techniques. And so all of these things that can be pre-kitchen skills, or then we can just take them into the kitchen and actually have them working. My sister's sister-in-law has a quote in her kitchen that says, "Cooking is like love. It must be done with abandon or not at all." I just love that. And so we just have to have fun with this, and we have to let our children lead us into these places. And so we can really just have a great time with that. We can also have, we used to do crazy things like, we would add different coloring to things and different times of the year and seasons. And, just the other day I needed to add something, and I had some beet juice in the refrigerator. So we added a little beet juice, and it turned it a little bit pink, and that was fun. And sometimes, the berries in the garden, or the onion skins, walnut shells, we could have fun with those dyes and natural things. You said about the garden too, which just made me think of something. And that is that when we have our gardens outside, the children are learning about what plants are edible, what plants are, should they be staying away from. And that's really important that they learn those things. But also that we talk about letting the children eat a rainbow. And so there's a lot of times there's those things that we can add into our foods, like even just a salad, making a simple salad. The children can tear the lettuce. That's so easy for them to do. And then there's calendula growing out in the garden that you can put in the little orange petals, or borage, which is a wonderful source of nutrition, but those pretty blue flowers, or, a little bit of lavender. And so when we start mixing it up to a little bit of flowers, a little bit of the vegetables, a little bit of the, different things, getting the color in there, getting them used to the different flavors, the mint, the miner's lettuce, the basil,
sour grass,
right?
My kids love sour grass. Yeah.
Oh, and it's all over there right now, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. We're eating the little pine tips.
Oh, really? Yeah. Like the pine nuts. I mean, there's so much found food. Yeah. And really making sure that the safety piece of it is that what is edible and what is not, that is really key.
We were talking about different cultures as well. And that's something that, here in the United States, we've gone more towards that fast food movement. Whereas, a lot of cultures around the world, they're really looking at this old idea of slow food, of real food. And I think that there's countries that are much further ahead of us right now in terms of like school lunches and nutrition for children. I know in Italy and France and Spain, the school lunches are real food. And there's a fun book. I don't know if I agree with all of the parenting suggestions in it, but Bringing Up Bébé was a fun book to read years ago, with sort of the French parenting model. But just that children, they eat what we put in front of them. And if we give them too many choices, then they start going into that sort of typical kid food mentality. And so when we go to a restaurant and there's a child's menu, that's quite often, it's sort of simplified.
It's chicken tenders, hot dogs, pizza, hamburgers, right? That's what it is.
And my children and my grandchildren have always had much more sophisticated palates than that, because they've been exposed to a lot. And I know yours are as well. And the first time we took our son to a sushi restaurant, it was hilarious. I mean, he just wanted to try everything.
Right. Right. I know. And that's, I think, I remember my sister telling me a story. Her daughter had just come back as an exchange student from Spain, and they were out at a restaurant out in, up in the Bay Area, and she had sweetbreads, and the chef came out to meet the child who asked for that, and it was like, oh my God.
That's what I remember when my brother, we were kids and we went to a restaurant in Bolinas, and my brother had ordered steamed clams, and the waitress refused to get them for him because she said he wouldn't eat them. And finally my parents had to intervene and say, oh, no, he will. So,
that's funny, because that's where my sister was, out in Point Reyes.
Yeah. That's funny.
But the thing I remember that I wanted to go back when we were talking about the garden is growing an herb garden. I mean, how many times have I said to my kids, go out and get me some rosemary, go out and get me some thyme, oregano, so that practice is the familiarity, and how easy it is to grow an herb garden. The other thing that we were talking about was sprouting. And kind of projects. I like doing projects with the kids. I think that's kind of just that homeschool mentality type thing, where it's like the sourdough, that's my daughter's project type thing. The other thing is sprouting. And I remember I did a classroom project in the homeschool classroom about sprouting, where each child brought in their own jar. We used Tool. Actually, we used Tool as a sprouting screen. You could do it, you could buy your own sprouting screen. but basically, the practice of rinsing your sprouts and then making them grow and seeing what you can do with those. We sprouted wheat berries, which is super easy and super fun to put in your salads as well as to cook and stuff. Really great.
Well, there's so many projects too. The sweet potato, the avocado pit, those kinds of things that make me growing all over the counter. And so we just want to just really have fun with that.
Uh-huh. And kind of hopping around here because I had that thought about the herbs, but the other one I want to continue is your French one. And I remember one of the things my daughter, she was an exchange student last year in France. And that was the thing she came back with, was like, oh my gosh, the food that she was fed at school as part of her day was an amazing meal that she got to have. She had the salad and she had the baguette, of course, and the cheese and, just a really full meal.
And the children have real utensils and cloth napkins, and it's not this throwaway society. And so I think here in the United States, we're getting there. We're starting to talk about these things. And I know Pacific School is a perfect example. They have cloth napkins. They use real utensils. The children help to set the table. They help to prepare the meals. They're doing it themselves. And so that's really exciting. Here in our household, the 6-year-old now is setting the table. He's very proud of his ability to put the napkins in every place and to put the silverware out. And so we're showing him what goes where. And we talk about, this came up just the other day. I was cracking up that when my kids were little, there was a Swedish princess that had been born right around the same time as my kids. And I was always saying, well, you never know, you might get invited to the palace. And so, we talked about manners and we talked about learning how to set the table right and all these kinds of things that we can bring in the kitchen that become sort of this different lessons of life.
Yeah, and life skills. It's sometimes my kids do certain things at our dinner table that I'm like, when you're at your friends' houses, this is not going to go, but it's that practice, and that's where it is. It is fun to set the table, to go over manners, making it fun, and as a child, I have to say, my parents were very, specifically my father was very, could not have elbows on the table, could not, just very, very strict. And I would get sent from the table. I grew up in a pretty strict household. And so I kind of went away from that a little bit, but then yet my kids know, oh yeah, when you're at grandma and grandpa's house, those rules kind of apply. But I'm glad I have a base knowledge, but there's a way to do it where it's a lot more, a lot more fun and nice.
That's so interesting because our family, the dinner table was not that exciting. My parents would talk and us kids would sit and listen and eat. And I always thought, that I wanted our dinner table to be much more fun. And so there's that balance of, having fun and not letting it devolve into food fights, but also learning the manners, but having dinner be an engaging, or the meals be an engaging place. Yeah. And that everybody's voice is heard and everybody can share. But again, if the children have been preparing the meal, they're so proud of that and they're excited to be a part of all of that. Meal planning. A lot of times the kitchen projects are just fun projects that are going on, but we can involve the kids in the planning of the meals and be asking them some of their favorite recipes and what do we want to try tonight. And even just taking different food groups and combining them and thinking about the colors on the plates. I was just reading a book this morning and she was talking about in Japan, the arrangement of the food by color and how the textures and, he's like, it's really fun when you start thinking about what do we put together and how do we make it colorful. And the one of the adults would say, wait, this needs more color. And so what things do we bring in? And that's where we can think about it ahead of time, or we can just grab those garnishes, a little bit of mint or parsley for the green, a little bit of the borage and the salad, but.
Right. And that's a way, that we can kind of hide some vegetables, into food, because I know there's some kids that have already been conditioned to be scared of color, to be scared of the greens, the reds and stuff like that. And it goes in waves. You keep on bringing it in, but there are things that you can do. So for example, and like liver, for example, it's a nutrient dense food, really good for your kids. You really want to bring that in. But how do you? Well, you blend it in with ground beef. You blend it in with, and you don't tell your kids, but, I actually dehydrated a bunch of liver and I made it in a shaker and then would shake it on in the ground beef and the meatloaf or whatever, hamburgers. They would never know. But sometimes that does work too.
Yeah. Well, the Nourishing Traditions cookbook has an amazing recipe for chicken liver pate. And my kids love that. But then he's got mushrooms and green onions and butter and, so.
Mustard. Yeah. Dijon. Yeah. Spicy mustard. Yeah. That's a great recipe.
But also, you can make spaghetti sauce and you can put all kinds of things in there. And so, but what I find is the children, if they're participating, they usually will eat it. But then, yes, if you have the picky ones, you can always be a little bit sneaky and pop things in and puree things.
Yeah. As much as we don't want to be sneaky, it's just, I do feel like sometimes there is that space where you can be. Do not let perfect be the enemy of the good.
There you go. Right. Yeah. I'm going to say I have been sneaky on occasion when we reach those points where somebody would refuse to eat something that I knew they really needed to be having in their diet. But in general, we tried to include them in everything and have them be a part of it and try new things too. And that's the other thing is that we have to try new things. We have to try new flavors. And so with a very small child, you just keep introducing them and don't give up, because if they say they don't like something at one age, well, 3 months later, their palate might have changed and they're willing to try it. Or you try it in a different format, or you try, cooking something in a different way. I remember I used to not like mushrooms when I was a child. And finally, as a preteen, I think I had that on pizza somewhere. I was like, oh, these are great. But, that was the way that
I was a pretty picky eater, I think, as a child. And so now my palate is super expanded and yeah, it's cool. I think food can either be, what is the quote from Anne Wigmore? Food can either be our, slowest form of poison or quickest form of medicine.
I like that.
And I believe that, and especially for our children, if we are feeding them standard American diet for convenience, we're feeding them to be full. We're not feeding them to be, nutritious, to be active, to be fit. And that's really our goal. It's that paying attention with intention of, going that extra mile, making that smoothie rather than purchasing the Go-Gurts, and not to say, like, I guess, again, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? But yet you have to pay attention. You can't constantly be buying prepackaged foods, because that all, the plastic being used and just the waste and stuff.
Right. And the sodium, it's interesting. I just saw an article yesterday. It was talking about that really the sodium, the excess sodium in all of the processed foods. And then also the fact that we're not eating, when we're eating all of the processed food, we're not eating the healthy foods. And so really that's what's doing us in, is that the lack of really nutritious, the 9 to 12 fruits and vegetables a day that we should be getting. And so when we're eating those processed foods, we're not getting the things that we should be getting. It's, we talk about so many things in this podcast about what we really need is the healthy food, the healthy outdoor time, the healthy, developmental play. And so when we do these things that are counter to that, it takes away from what we really need to be getting. But again, having fun with it and bringing it in ways that is engaging is so important.
Yeah. And I think the point of this podcast is really get your kids in the kitchen, have a what the heck attitude, get messy, buy tools that support fun, the apple core, like I said, the spiralizer, the tortilla press, the orange juice maker, that, right? Start with the orange juice maker. Yesterday, we're in spring, it's a little bit overcast, but Juliet had a lemonade stand, made $10 and for a couple hours. So it's like, do that, like have fun and don't be afraid.
Yeah, the juicers. You were talking the other day about, the hand egg beater. The kids love that. The whisk. Yeah. And so, the nutcracker, all of these tools. My mother has been involved with Williams Sonoma, the Chuck Williams Museum that's open at Copia in Napa. And, talk about a man who collected his kitchen utensils. It's just an incredible museum of all of these amazing kitchen utensils. And so, if you're in that area, I would advise you to take your kids, get inspired.
And that's a great idea because, I buy some of my kitchen stuff. I've bought at antique shops. Mm-hmm. I have bought a sifter. I have an antique sifter. It's another thing my kids love. I've bought a pounder that, at an antique shop that we use for sauerkraut. So there's definitely, my cast iron, antique shops. So
I have an Abelskever pan that I found at a garage sale, I think. So it's going to be fun to bring that up. So the other day, that just reminded me of something. So the 6-year-old, I was opening up my cardamom essential oil and he smelled it and he said, Mimi, I ground that at your house. Anyhow, we have an old fashioned cardamom grinder that was my grandmother's from Finland. And she passed it down to me. And it's this little tiny old grinder. And so we would get the fresh cardamom, toast it a little bit, put the pods in the grinder, and he would grind it. And this was probably a year and a half ago, at least. It was the last time he did it. He smelled the cardamom oil and he remembered that utensil and grinding the cardamom seeds. I was just amazed by that. But how, smell is it's the first sense we come into the world with. It's the last to go. So of course these aromas bring up these memories. Think about, when we would walk into our grandmother's kitchen and there was a scent that we just connected with them. And so having that time in the kitchen really makes these memories with our children, with our grandchildren, that become ingrained forever.
Yeah.
So I couldn't believe that story. It was sweet.
That's great.
So just, don't be afraid. Get out there, have fun with your children, have fun in the kitchen, and enjoy that time. It's a great way to help your children learn all kinds of life skills.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to do is have the kids in the kitchen for sure. So go ahead and get your kids in there.
All right. Until next time, have fun.
All right. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us today for The Moms I Know. To learn more about Sheila and her online program, The Mom Map, visit purplebeetnutrition.com. For Maria's monthly blog and to learn more about her group programs and retreats, visit soquelessentials.com. That's SOQUEL essentials.com. We hope you enjoyed today's episode of The Moms I Know. Until next week, have a joyful family journey.